Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for some more tag time. This is my starting point for today. This is a brick wall we made, it must be a year ago now, I think, with texture paste and a stencil and lots of other scrumptious bits and bobs. I'll link to the video for that below, and if you go and watch it, you'll see that the colour has shifted a bit over time. Bits have faded, bits seems to have darkened. And I've got these roses, which were just a cheap supermarket bunch of roses, and it became very clear they weren't going to open fully, at which point I just hung them upside down in a quiet room and let them get on with drying. So they've been drying in the hanging downwards position, which has given me a whole bunch of, dried little rosebud heads. I think they're not going to look great against the pink wall. So my thought is to change the colour. My guess is the red is not going to go away entirely. We know from experience that red is a very persistent colour if you've used it. And we'll see. But I'm thinking they'd look nicer against a sort of Cotswold stone type wall. If you've never been to the Cotswolds in the UK, it's a beautiful sort of creamy honey gold. I'm thinking more creamy than honey gold, to be honest, but I've got a few stone, which seems like an obvious choice, eggshell for a bit paler, taupe for a bit darker, and some distressed crayons. And I'm just going to dive right in and attempt to change the colour of this brick wall. We'll see how it goes. As I say, I think bits of the reddish pink are going to keep showing through. So for once, this IKEA craft brush didn't get well looked after. It's gone a bit stubby, a bit hard, but that will be useful for other purposes. But for now, I want something that's going to be a little bit more flexible to brush down into the bricks grid. There we go. Let's start with stone, because that seems like a sensible thing to start with. There's crackle and all sorts here, so you know, I am maybe going to lose a little bit of texture as I do this, or if I can manage to keep these coats thin enough, then I can probably get that texture back in various ways. What is going to vanish is probably the book page text that is right in the lowest layer. I'm not going to mind a little bit of the red/pink bleeding through, because I think that'll be a sort of nice echo of the colour of these rosebuds, which were obviously, when they were fresh, were a gentle shade of pink and are now somewhat less pink, but in a good way. So yeah, you can see that looks as though I've covered up my pink to a large extent, but I know full well that as these things dry, things can change. So I'm going to go in with another. This is eggshell, so this is definitely heading to a creaminess, and will hopefully offset any reds that choose to keep poking through. At the moment there's a yellowy tone coming, which is interesting. So those are already going to show up better. Apologies for the light coming and going. It's a glorious day outside, but there is the occasional little white cloud, fluffy white cloud heading overhead. I'm just adjusting the light. If it becomes really annoying, I will put on our artificial lights, but it seems a shame given it's so gloriously sunny out there. Okay, that's a starting point, but as you can see, that has smoothed out a lot of the textures that are available here in our brick walls. So what I'm going to do is do some of the things which will get us that texture back again. That can include the distressed crayons going over the top to highlight texture. But another good way to do it is to sink some colour down in between, which you can do with a fluid kind of a medium. But before I experiment with anything like that, I'm going to need to dry this. So I'll do that with a heat tool and be back in a sec. As suspected, that pinkiness underneath has started to make a slight recover. Now it really is a pink wall. So I've got this thing here, Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleedproof White, which is somewhere, it's quite a thick ink. I don't think I want to apply it as thick as it is. You can see it's almost as thick as a thin acrylic paint, But I'm going to try putting a coat of this on, because if it is supposed to be bleed proof, then it ought to stop all that redness bleeding through. Then once this is on, I can go again with my stony colours and see if that helps. Maybe I shouldn't expect it to do its task if I have made it watery. Maybe I should put on a firmer coat. Quite enjoying the white brick wall. That's very California, isn't it? California beach house. White bricks. Okay, let's try drying that. And see if that red continues to come through. In which case, that's such a thin medium that I could put on some more, and I'm not going to jeopardize too much texture. Back in a sec. Interestingly, that has taken me to the sort of warm honey colour I was sort of thinking about. There does seem to be a diminishment in the pink, so that's a good step forward. When I say red persists, if you haven't seen the episodes where I try to not have red on the cover of my altered book, I will also link to those, because it's quite the journey. But I've also, I have to say, if you know my work, you'll know I work principally in sort of blues and greens and turquoises and greys and browns. I've never had a problem really with those projects discolouring over time as significantly as those reds did. So again, red is a difficult colour, I think. It's a difficult colour for me, I don't know, emotionally, artistically. There's no two ways about it. It makes me angry. Red is a colour that I find very antagonistic. So I don't use it often, but it turns out there are practical reasons as well, because if it's going to discolour over time and it's going to make it impossible when you're trying to change the colour of something and it's going to just bleed through all the time, very practical reasons not to bother with with it. Right, I've got a little bit of taupe here, and what I'm going to do is maybe just pick out some individual bricks. So this is a process we engaged in when we created these brick walls originally, just so that you get that lovely variation that happens on old bricks, on old stone. You don't get uniform colour. We've already got that happening a little bit because things are slightly different tones from given what was underneath. But I think it's one of the things that to me is quite enjoyable about this process is this little artistic bit of just shifting the colour of some of these bricks. I'm going to put some of that taupe over the crackle element that's here, in the hope that some of that slightly darker tone will just go down into that crackle and give it a bit more prominence. But you can see as I'm doing that, it's just giving us a touch of variation across the tag, a little bit of slightly different colour and detail and all that sort of business going on, and I'm quite enjoying the results we're getting, so much so that I might do a little bit more of that. It's lovely colour taupe. It's got this sort of very gentle, cool mouse grey to it. I'm not putting much on the brush. It's almost a version of dry brushing that I'm doing in places, particularly once I've been going for a while and I've used up some of the paint on the brush. And that means it's also helping accentuate some of the texture in that texture paste that we created so cleverly. Watch the other video that's linked to in order to see how we created additional texture even on the texture paste. There we go. That's doing quite good things now. I quite like a little bit of darker grayer on these flat areas. I think that's quite good. Right, time for a little bit of distress crayon, I think, because that's a lovely thing for really highlighting these subtle bits of texture. Let's get some of that into action. I've got several on the thing. I've got antique linen, which will give us a slightly warm yellowish tone. I've got my much loved pumice stone, this hickory smoke somewhere, which might be nice to have around. So the thing with the crayons is you can apply it, so I tend to rub flat over the texture and you'll get that really detailed sort of look. You can go in with a dampish brush or even just your finger will do it to soften that, or you can leave it as it is. It does sort of set. It doesn't fully dry, I think. Generally, if you were to go in with some water afterwards, you would still create movement in these flecks of colour. But I quite like just, can you see how that's bringing those bricks to life when I just rub very lightly? It's just hitting the raised bits of texture, it's hitting the corners, and it's just drawing our attention to that surface of brick texture. Really nice. And I don't think I'm going to do much rubbing with my finger. I don't really feel the need to soften anything very much at the moment. If you suddenly end up with a big lump of the stuff, you can lose it, as it were, by rubbing it away. But I think I'm pretty happy. So in here where it's on the flat bit, that I am going to rub and soften, but it does create a lovely aging, distressing, rough look, which is really quite nice. And again, I've applied it over the top of this crackle. The crackle's sort of got a bit lost in the layers of paint, but I'm really fine with that. It's not the point. I love that. That's looking good to me. Quite a strong bit on the bottom there because I want some weight at the bottom of the wall, but as you can see, I can spread that out in quite an interesting way. I might create a little more darkness in a couple of places to just again intensify that sense of age and dirt and time accruing on these bricks. Yep, I like that. Let's have a bit more down at the bottom because that's fun. There we go. Beautiful. I don't think I feel the need for any others. So that was Hickory Smoke in the end that got its starring role on this wall. Nice. Let's have a look at a couple of these rosebuds. I'm just going to snip them. I'm going to keep quite a long length if I can to start with, because I don't know how tall I want them. So I'm going to try and snip quite far down and see what I can extract. Let's start at one edge. So I'm fully prepared for some of these buds to just fall off as I go. Oh. Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to need many. I think it might be one more. So let's have you, because you're at the other edge of the bouquet, so you're going to come out without too much trouble. You know, it might be as simple as that. One of the things is attaching these is going to be interesting. Obviously glue is going to help, but I have already sort of thought that another way is going to be to wrap some twine around, potentially here, which will help hold it, or it could be rusty wire. I've got some wire hanging around here. There's a little bit. Rusty wire would be nice, wouldn't it? Or just plain black wire or garden wire. Yes, that's all very enjoyable. So I have pulled out my very first set of quote stamps for PaperArtsy, EAB01, which was Trees and Flowers. And on it, I've got the Gertrude Stein. She's probably Gertrude Stein, isn't she, being American as opposed to German. Rose is a rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. She was a strange and wonderful writer, Gertrude Stein. If you've not read any, I commend her to your attention. But that just seemed like the perfect quote to go with this. I'm going to stamp it now on some cards so that I've got a sense of the size of it. And then as I go, I'll decide what kind of colour or whatever it might be. But I want to have it around to play with, so that I can work out what it is I want. Let's start with it in olive, just for fun. You never know. Let's pop it on this. I might as well go on this end. Let's save card while we're at it, because that's a nice big piece I can use for something else. Roses are roses are roses are roses are roses are roses are roses. I might have one in Pebble Beach also, just to see. And as you saw, I really didn't properly wipe the stamp in between, so I'm expecting there to be a little bit of green going on there as well, perhaps. Yeah, no, that's mostly, I would say, Pebble Beach. A little bit of green on that rose, that word rose. So with the quotes, you can choose to keep the poet or author, or in the long run you might choose to cut them off if it's just taking up a bit too much room. Sometimes I cut them off and then insert them in a different place on the tag. It's one of the great joys to me of being able to have these great poets, great philosophers, great thinkers, great writers have their contribution as well as that of nature. I'm quite liking that already, just as it is. Let's see. So the other option would be to just keep the quote there and maybe put Gertrude Stein herself. So automatic, sorry, on my German speaking tongue wants to say Stein. Okay, let's have a look at, so I don't think I'm going to want it in Pebble Beach because it's too much the same as the background and everything. So with Pebble Beach, I can just experiment with what it's like in terms of taking up space. If we do that, that's quite nice, isn't it? And then if we want to keep Gertrude herself in the picture, as it were, snip, snip, that takes up less space. Could go down here. That's quite nice. I quite like giving credit to the writers. I think it's important to acknowledge writers, and I think it's important to pay attention to words and how they are used, particularly in the current day and age where words are more often used to manipulate us than to tell us truths. Grand. That's my words side just rearing her head briefly in the midst of rosiness. I do think it's probably going to be the green because I quite like that. But at the moment, let's leave that there to play with. I also fished out some of my pre-stamped tinted labels. I wondered if those might be a thing. And I think they might. There's some of my own stamps. There's some of the Tim Holtz Curator labels. That's possibly a little bit too big. It's a beautiful stamp with a ship, real 17th century Dutch shipping company label, that. But it's quite nice. I don't think I want to go too turquoise. So the thing with these is they've had the slightly greener bit of the matinting going on as opposed to the bluer bit of the matinting. If you haven't seen the matinting of the labels, I will also link to that. I'm just thinking that's quite nice because it's a bit larger. And or I've got the pre-printed versions here. Oh look, I'm thinking that might be useful. And I'm thinking that might be useful. Things with a greenish tinge are what I'm pulling out at the moment. A couple of those. That's really quite a full-on green. But maybe that's nice. Seem to have two of those. Haven't used either of them in several packets. Nice little tiny one. That's got a hint of green about it. Okay, now I do need to look at this back on here to make sure that we're not overdoing the greenery. I think that's going to be quite nice. But I am wondering about reverting to twine, because twine is sort of gardeny. Roses, 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 rose. Secret garden in the garden wall. That's all quite nice. And then the only other thing I pulled out are these little mini plaquettes. They're another Tim Holtz Idea-ology, and they're just like vintage door plaque, number plaques for doors. And there's something, whenever I see them on sale, I tend to grab a packet because I just think they're beautiful. I might have a look at one of those on here. And then what I think I'm going to need to do is just sort of do a bit of looking to see what it is I want to have happen. So we're now looking at a sort of doorway. Maybe it wants to be mounted. Oh, that's quite nice. Look at that. Just gives it a bit more heft up there rather than it looking abandoned in the middle of nowhere. A couple of these kind of, maybe it's around the quote that these want to happen. Let's have another of those. You're quite cute. So let's bring you out. something here. Might be time to cut this, be bold. Can always restamp it if I decide I want to reinstate Gertrude's name. There's nothing stopping me going for a restamp. But I think that's sort of a nicer... Not doing very well at cutting straight lines today. I think that's working better with the labels. Sorry, failed to finish the thought there because my brain had gone in another direction already. So yeah, it's something around that and that, a little bit of oliviness, maybe another little bit of greenery just connected to here. Maybe it's not that. Maybe Gertrude herself needs a little bit of attention down at the bottom. That's quite nice. Sort of enjoying that there. It's a bit invisible. Maybe we connect that to Gertrude down here. Nope, don't like that. But there might be something else that needs to go with Gertrude. Let's move that up a little bit. Ah, yes, look, so that's now where this one was previously. Another bit of greenery down here. Gertrude. We've got a little teeny tiny one. Ooh, or a round one, that would be nice. Is it green enough or is it too blue? It's just about green enough. Let's try that there instead of that. Then it could have this little one next to it. Yeah, and then you could head back over here. Maybe you head down here because you're smaller. La la. Then the bigger one behind here. Coming off that side, this is coming off this side. So now I've got things emerging from the tag, and I think it's going to be that. Grand. I'm going to pause and have a little look, because at the moment things are sort of tilting over this way. I'm going to see if there's a way to reduce the effect of that. Maybe it's as simple as taking some of those labels off. Too many labels. That's quite good. Now all the labels have got more than one label with them except this one, so maybe this belongs down with Gertrude. Good, so I'm going to pause and have a look at that. If I decide I like it, I'll do some gluing down of the labels, and I'll come back to show you the gluing down of the roses. Grand. So for the most part I'm glued down, yeah, in most places. I've switched over these two roses because I noticed A, this one is not long enough to reach the ground, as it were. B, it was sitting that way round, which was nice when it was going there, but I discovered you get a much better rose if you flip it and then it wants to go in that direction, and then this one is going upwards. So that's sort of changing a little bit about how things are happening on the tag, but that's grand. Left some space here, still haven't decided on wire or twine. Haven't done this yet because I thought that might be something you'd have a vague interest in. So gluing down the roses, it is going to be a question of gently coaxing them down towards the tag. I'm using my Liquitex matte super heavy gel. So this is the one that's sort of peanut butter, cream, cheesy kind of texture. And somewhere there must be a coffee stirrer to do this with. Yeah, I usually dig around with just one of these little wooden sticks. Yeah, it's not just cream cheesy these days because it's been open for literally years. It's taken me over 10 years, I think, probably, to get through this pot. I've just had a replacement pot given to me for my birthday, so it'll be fine if this drops. But you can see that's incredibly gloopy. It's not actually, if you were to buy a new pot, it's not actually quite as gloopy as that. That's mine, that, as I say, has been open for some years now. as I make my way through it. So the buds at the back have got some glue on. We might need to open the new pot today, because what I need it to do is do the immediate gluing thing, which this glue usually does, even with quite heavy objects. But it's so glutinous now that it's being a little bit reluctant. This leaf is almost certainly going to come off. That's fine. I'll live with that if and when it happens. Need this a little further up, I noticed, because if I position the buds downwards, ooh, I really don't need that much. So this is the matte super heavy gel. It comes in a gloss as well, but as you can imagine, I don't want great glossy gobbets of glue for the most part all over my projects. Grand. So I'm gonna, as I say, encourage that downwards. I'm going to peel away this ridiculous gobbet here that really doesn't need to be that significant, and I'm going to focus my attention on those buds and really asking them to, the leaf is squashable obviously, so this is why I had already thought I'm going to want some twine on the job for this as well. This one, because there's not very much in terms of these roses that is actually touching the surface of the tag, and I don't want to squash them. Again, these are fragile, of course they are, and so this isn't going to last forever. It isn't going to be any good if you want to send it through the post, or, well, I mean, wrap it in tissue, bubble wrap, all those kinds of things. It should be possible, but it'd be much better hand delivered to somebody you love. Let's see if we can get you to join in the game, and actually having you in place may help to hold down number 2. So as you can see, I'm now pressing quite firmly. I'm debating bringing a clothes peg into the action, but I'm worried that might be a little bit too much for these dried rose stems, and they might just crack under the pressure. But actually that's quite helpful there while that dries in various places. Let's just make sure we've got enough glue to touch, and then it can just get on with gluing. That one's fine. That one could have a little bit on the back. Sorry, this is difficult to keep clear exactly where I'm going, but I'm pretty happy with that as a bunch and as an arrangement. I think that's worked out quite well. I did go with green in the end. I had another little look at the grey, but I think the presence of the green is nice, and I have done a little bit of inking around the edge just with some walnut stain distress ink. So as I'm looking at this, my main thought at the moment is, do I or don't I? Do I want rusty wire? Do I want twine? So applying these come, the plaquettes come with little teeny tiny attachers. Now, you may remember, or you may have been back to watch, we've mounted this brick background on quite a sturdy piece of packaging cardboard. So those tiny attachers may turn out not to want to go all the way through. But the simplest way I've found for me to do this is a bradawl, which is a marvellous tool straight out of the DIY toolkit. And I just go straight through till it's poking out of the back of the cardboard and everything. Now, for positioning these, it's quite good if you can get the first one in. So these are just like any old brads. They go through, got a wonderful little cross shape. Can you see the screw head shape on there? Then through the other, oh, it's just through. I wonder if I can find the little bits of metal to fold. Oh, just. I think there's just going to be enough to hold. So then yeah, 2 bits of metal come through and you fold them away from each other. Apologies if I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs again. That phrase caused a furore last time I used it. Teaching somebody who knows perfectly well how to do a thing, how to do a thing. Yeah, that's holding. So having done that one, the positioning of it now, I don't need to worry so much about getting the hole in the right place because it's held already. So as I put that hole through, so one thing is don't stick the brad all through into your finger. That's my advice. That's a real crafting tip there. Don't put your finger right behind the hole you're making. Don't make a hole in yourself. It happens. It happens so easily because you're trying to put pressure opposite the place you're putting the hole through, which automatically means that your finger tends to head to the exact point where the bradawl is going to come through and do the most damage. And I mean, you can, if it suddenly pops through the cardboard like that, you could go quite deep into your finger. So just watch it, is what I'm saying. I can feel those two bits of metal. I can't quite get them to separate at the moment. There we are. Interestingly, that one seems to have come a lot further through. Maybe the cardboard's thicker in one place than the other. And you do have a little bit of wiggle once that's in place. You're on the move. That's not so good, given you're the thing holding that rose head down. Let's get a little bit more glue behind these labels. Because given the rose is glued to the labels, it would be good if the labels were glued to the wall. There we are. And what can I press down with without getting my finger in the way? Because the wall is very textured, it's not completely straightforward gluing down even the flattest bits of paper. As you can see, the texture of the wall means there isn't always something for the flat surface to grab onto. So we don't want. Okay, I'm still in two minds about this twine versus rusty wire game. The wire is very delicate, that's nice. This is quite thick twine. Maybe what I need is some of my usual fine twine instead. Maybe that's the happy medium. Good, let's pop you back on there while I go and find some twine. You see how that all moves the minute I press down here. So it is going to make a difference to wrap twine around here. It's going to pull those rosebuds forward. Off to get some twine, and we're almost there. I've got some to go through the top as well as some to go around the bottom. It's just a question of how many layers. So that would be 3, which is quite good, isn't it? This piece I don't think is quite long enough to go 3 times round, actually all the way around the back and there. So what you can do is cheat it. You go 1, 2, 3. So that is my 3 layers, kind of equidistant. Wrap it around. And then what I'll do is I can use some tape on the back to just hold that down. Or if I'm going to wrap round and round and round, because I'm just thinking it might be quite nice to have a little knot at the front. So let's have a look at how much we can get out of. I didn't measure before I cut. I just eyeballed it. And as you've seen, it's enough. Okay, so if it's 2 and a knot, that might be a good alternative. So let's hold that there, twice round, 1, 2, and I'm remembering we do actually want it to have a function, thinking about it. We do need it to actually do some holding of roses in place, which the taped version will do less effectively, I think, than the wrapped round version. So I'm pulling that tight, doing a little just double knot. Hopefully. Come on, fingers. There we go. Just a little knot around there. And then if I pull those a bit broader so that you get that lovely V shape, it will also tauten and tighten the hold that that's got on the roses, which means I'm going to take the risk of removing the peg. Let's have that going that way. And if you want to add a little bit extra to that knot, I'm just going to put the cross at the point of the knot. I don't want it crossing partway across the tag. If you want to add a little bit extra, you can always tuck a little additional piece through. So this will hold the knot at that central point, hopefully, and give us slightly longer bits of knot. I don't think I want it quite that long, but I quite like that additional presence. So I think we'll snip it sort of here, and we'll snip it. Actually, it's quite good going off down there in the same direction as the stems. Sorry, slipping off camera. That's good. Going to put a little bit through the top. So going through texture paste to create the hole at the back of the tag, I I sort of know from there where it is, so I'm just going to go through in that direction first. And then for that, I'm going to create a little bit of extra weathering just with the blending tool and the walnut stain in through that messy hole. I don't want to create a perfect hole at the top there because I quite like just this look of distress and decay that's going on. I'm going to do just the absolute conventional through with a loop, tug the loop, and then through the loop. And for the moment, I'm going to leave those rose stems leaning off the bottom, although that did just move everything. Thanks. Interestingly, though, it only moved it slightly and it didn't go away. I think what I need to do is set ourselves up for our little close-up. And thank you for your company today. I am, as you can see, going in for a little bit of white spatter. I've got the perfect protector. I know that's the right size for there. I seem to have lost Gertrude Stein in grey, but I have got 2 other little snippets here, just so we don't cover up the wording with the spatter. I don't mind it going anywhere else, but I don't want to lose. Oh, there we are. Don't want to lose the words, don't want to lose the author. Just the life of that is just magic, how it brings your attention to the dimension of the roses. Yeah, I like that. Grand. As I was saying, thank you so much for your company on this creative journey. I will link to the videos I've mentioned. I'll see if I can remember them all. If I don't, just let me know in the comments that I've left off one of the videos I promised you. And yeah, do go and have an explore to see how all the various bits of this tag have been hanging around the craft room. Some of them for over a year before they finally get their place in the sun. Thank you so much for your company and happy crafting all. You see, I knew there was something else. I got out also the Rustic Wilderness distress crayon because I thought what might be quite nice would be to put just a hint of mossiness on some of these bricks. Just some green to, yeah, both echo the other greens that are going on, but also to give that sense of a little bit of moss in the cracks of the wall. So yeah, just that as a final little additional touch. The Rustic Wilderness is not quite the same colour as we've been using, so I am going to also dig out the peeled paint to mix in. And that's the other joy of these distress crayons, is that you can just, you blend directly on the project. So that's a little bit of peeled paint with the Rustic Wilderness, just giving us those little hints of mossy messiness. Right, I am going away this time. Happy crafting all.